The truck was on its side before the morning fog had cleared. A delivery vehicle, 14 tons loaded with winter supplies for the farms above the Bergkamp, flour and oil and salt, and the kind of things that do not run out easily in summer but become critical by November, had come through the third switchback on the Alpenstrasse at a speed that was, in the driver's later assessment, appropriate for the conditions he had been expecting. The conditions he encountered were different from the conditions he had been expecting. The autumn frost had come early to the upper section of the road, and on the tightest part of the third switchback, there was a film of ice beneath the morning shadow of the rock face that neither the driver nor the road maintenance team that serviced this road had anticipated. The truck had slid, not dramatically, not the kind of cinematic mountain road disaster that people imagine when they think about Alpine roads. Slowly, with the particular inevitability of heavy vehicles on frictionless surfaces, the right rear corner of the truck had gone over the road edge on the downhill side, and then everything that followed from that had been physics, not driving. The truck came to rest on its right side, wheels in the air, lying across the full width of the road at the apex of the third switchback. The driver climbed out through the driver's window onto the uphill rock face and sat down on the road and waited. The road was blocked completely. Above it, 3 farms, a cheese dairy, and 14 people who had no other route to the valley. Below it, a supply convoy that was going nowhere. The mountain was not concerned with any of this. Carl Brenner arrived with the Alpine Road Maintenance Unit at 9:15. He was 38 years old, had been running the Bergkamp Road District since 1963, and had handled 4 vehicle incidents on this road in that time. He stepped out of the lead vehicle, looked at the overturned truck, looked at the road, looked at the switchback geometry, and began making calls. By 11, he had stopped making calls. If this is your first story on this channel, subscribe now and hit the bell. New story every single day. Let me tell you about the third switchback on the Alpenstrasse, because the geography of that specific curve is where this story lives and dies. The Alpenstrasse above Ramsau climbed 600 meters in 8 kilometers, connecting the valley floor to the upper farming country that had been producing milk, cheese, and livestock in the Bavarian Alps since the 12th century. The road had been built in 1892, widened twice, and resurfaced 3 times, but its essential character had not changed. It was a mountain road, single lane, built to the minimum width that allowed a laden cart or a loaded truck to pass without going over the edge. And in the places where the gradient forced tight switchbacks, it was exactly that wide and not any wider. The third switchback was the tightest. It turned 180 degrees around a rock buttress on the uphill side, and a sheer drop of 40 meters on the downhill side, and the radius of the turn was tight enough that a standard delivery truck could complete it only by pulling as far as possible to the rock wall on the uphill side before turning. In good conditions with a careful driver, this was manageable. In the conditions that had existed that morning, it had not been. The problem Brenner faced was not one problem but 3. First, the overturned truck filled the entire road width at the apex of the switchback. There was no way to drive past it. Second, to right the truck, to rotate it back onto its wheels, required a recovery vehicle positioned on the uphill rock face side, where the pull would rotate the truck toward the road surface rather than over the edge. Third, the uphill rock face side of the road at the third switchback was approximately 2 meters and 40 centimeters wide. No modern recovery vehicle in Brenner's inventory was narrow enough to occupy that space. He had called for a mobile crane from Berchtesgaden. The crane arrived at 10:30. The operator took one look at the approach road below the switchback and explained, with professional courtesy, that his machine required a turning radius of 11 meters at minimum, and that the approach to the third switchback provided approximately 7. He had called the district engineering office. The engineering office called back at 11 with the suggestion that it might be necessary to partially dismantle the truck in situ before it could be moved. Brenner had looked down at the valley below and thought about partial dismantling of a 14-ton vehicle on a 40-meter drop on the Bergkamp Road in October, and decided that whatever was going to happen next needed to be something else. Josef Mayr had been watching from the rock face above the switchback since 9:45. He was 66 years old, and he had been driving this road since he was 16. Not regularly, but consistently across 50 years of Alpine farming life, in every season and every condition the mountain produced. He had driven it with horses in the 1940s, with his first tractor in the 1950s, and with the Lanz Bulldog since 1959. He knew this road the way you know a body of text that you have read many times, not by its general meaning but by its specific phrases, the particular places where the sense shifts without warning. He knew the third switchback specifically because his father had taught him about it in 1951, during the summer when the older man's eyesight had finally made it impossible for him to drive the upper section. His father had said, "At the third switchback, on the uphill side, there is a stone shelf cut by the original road workers in 1931. It is 60 centimeters below the road surface, goes back 1 meter into the rock face, and runs for 4 meters along the inside of the curve. It was made to allow carts to pass each other in the narrowest section. Nobody has used it for carts in 20 years, but the shelf is still there and the stone is solid limestone." Joseph had put that information somewhere in the part of his memory where things that might matter go. He had never needed it. He had simply known it was there. When he watched the mobile crane back down the approach road and leave, he thought about it. He walked down from the rock face, walked past the overturned truck, confirmed by standing in the road the distances he had already measured in his head. Then he walked back to his farm, 200 meters above the switchback on the upper section of road, and went to the barn. Brenner saw him coming back down, with the Lance 20 minutes later. "Mayor," he said. "There is a stone shelf on the uphill side of the switchback," Joseph said, 60 centimeters below the road surface, 4 meters long, 1 meter deep, cut in 1931. He looked at the switchback. The Lance's rear wheels on the shelf, front wheels on the road surface above. That puts the winch directly above the truck's underside with the right angle for a rotation pull. The shelf will hold the machine. Brenner looked at him. He looked at the Lance. He looked at his road crew, 2 men who had been standing near the barrier below the switchback. One of them was looking at the Lance and then at Brenner with an expression that contained, clearly visible, the opinion that a Lanz Bulldog was not the solution to a 14-ton overturned truck on an Alpine road. "You cannot see that shelf from up here," Brenner said. "No," Joseph said, "you have to know it is there." Brenner looked at the overturned truck, at the mobile crane gone, at the engineering office number in his notebook, at the option of dismantling the truck in situ on a mountain road in October. He looked at Joseph. "How long?" he said. 40 minutes, maybe less." The road crew member who had been expressing his opinion via facial expression said something under his breath to the other crew member. The second crew member shook his head slightly. "All right," Brenner said. Joseph was already walking the Lance toward the switchback. Let me tell you what Josef Mayr knew about this specific mountain road that Carl Brenner's engineering manual did not contain. The problem with riding an overturned vehicle is geometry. You need to apply force at a specific point, in a specific direction, to rotate the vehicle back onto its wheels without pushing it further off the road. On a flat surface you have options. On a narrow mountain road with a 40-meter drop on one side and a rock face on the other, your options are constrained to the point where, in most circumstances, they do not exist. They did not exist for a modern recovery vehicle. The minimum width requirement meant no modern machine could occupy the uphill position where the pull angle was correct. The Lanz Bulldog measured 2 meters and 12 centimeters at its widest point, the rear axle, with its rear wheels sitting on the stone shelf 60 centimeters below the road surface, and its front wheels on the road above. The machine's full width was contained within the road's uphill margin. It could stand in exactly the position a modern recovery vehicle could not reach. And the pull angle was everything. A winch pulling from directly above the truck's underside, which is what the shelf position provided, created a rotational force that worked with gravity rather than against it. The truck's own weight, distributed along its side, would cooperate with the pull once the rotation began. The cable did not need to lift 14 tons. It needed to initiate a rotation that the weight itself would then complete. The difference between lifting and rotating is the difference between impossible and merely difficult. Joseph had understood this intuitively since his father had explained the shelf to him in 1951. He had not thought of it in terms of rotational force. He had thought of it in terms of, if you are ever trying to write something on the third switchback, the shelf gives you the angle. His father had learned this from the original road workers, who had cut the shelf, because the narrow section of the switchback occasionally required this kind of operation with the heavy horse-drawn wagons of the early 20th century. The knowledge was 60 years old. The limestone shelf was 90 years old. Both had been waiting, undocumented, for the morning they would be needed again. Subscribe now if you have not yet, because what happens at the third switchback in the next 40 minutes is why this road still talks about Josef Mayr. He heated the glue cop on the mountain road with the rock face 2 meters to his left, and the overturned truck 4 meters to his right, and the valley 40 meters below the road edge. 7 minutes. The cast-iron hot bulb chamber took longer than usual in the cold Alpine air, the October chill competing with the torch, requiring patience rather than force. Joseph held the blowtorch from below, the blue-orange flame directed upward into the rounded iron dome at the base of the engine. His breath was visible. The road crew watched from below the barrier. Brenner watched from the road above the switchback. 7 minutes, the color arrived. He set the blowtorch aside, lifted the starting crank, turned it once. The flywheel moved. He turned it again, committed fully. On the third turn, the engine fired. Pum! The half-second of mountain silence before the echo. Then pum! The flywheel had its rhythm. Pum, pum, pum. 1 beat per second on an Alpine road in October. The sound going up the rock face and coming back changed. The mountain giving it back transformed, as if the sound belonged here and was simply confirming its arrival. The exhaust pipe sent its thread of dark smoke into the cold air. The lance settled into its vibration. Joseph climbed onto the open seat. He looked at the stone shelf below the road edge on the uphill side. He looked at the geometry of the truck. He looked once at the winch cable. Then he eased the lance forward and positioned its rear wheels over the shelf edge. This was the delicate part. Letting the rear wheels down onto the shelf 60 centimeters below required exact positioning. He had walked the shelf after the crane had left, confirmed the limestone was solid and the depth consistent. He had measured the positioning with his eye against the road surface features he had memorized before moving the machine. The rear wheels found the shelf, settled. Joseph felt it through the seat, the slight forward tilt as the rear dropped below the road level, the change in the angle, the new geometry. Solid. The limestone held. He attached the winch cable to the underside of the truck's chassis at the highest accessible point, directly above the truck's center of mass in its overturned position. He checked the cable twice. He walked back to the lance. He climbed on. Hit subscribe and the bell now, new story every single day. And this moment is exactly what this channel is about. He engaged the winch drum. Pum, pum, pum. The cable took tension. The engine note did not change. The flywheel turned at its steady pace. the torque between strokes absorbed and released with the smooth patience that had been engineered into the machine 30 years ago in Mannheim, and had been working on behalf of difficult situations ever since. The cable went from slack to taut. For 5 seconds nothing moved. The engine beat. The cable held. The truck lay on its side on the mountain road with the valley below it and the rock face above it, and a Lanz Bulldog pulling from a limestone shelf that nobody had used in 90 years. Then the truck moved. A rotation. The wheels in the air began to move toward the rock face side, slowly. With the measured inevitability of a very large mass that has been given the right kind of reason to move, not being lifted, being rotated. The near side of the truck lifted fractionally from the road surface, the far side pressing down, the whole machine pivoting around its underside with the winch cable as the axis. 10 degrees, 15. The truck's own weight was contributing now. Past 15 degrees, gravity was working with the pull rather than resisting it, and Josef held the throttle exactly where it was, steady, not surging, the flywheel doing what it was built to do. 20 degrees, 25. The road crew member below the barrier, the one who had expressed his opinion under his breath, was no longer expressing any opinion. He was standing at the barrier watching the truck rotate. 35 degrees. At 40 degrees, the truck passed its balance point. From here the pull became guidance rather than force. The truck would complete the rotation under its own weight. Josef held the cable taut. The truck rotated the final 50 degrees and landed on its wheels with a sound that was less of a crash and more of a deep, definitive settling, 4 rubber tires finding an Alpine road surface after an absence of 3.5 hours. Josef disengaged the winch. He coiled the cable. He eased the Lance's rear wheels back up off the limestone shelf onto the road. He drove the machine back to the pullout above the switchback. The road was clear. Karl Brenner walked up to the pullout as Josef was checking the winch cable. "Mayr," he said. Josef looked up. "The stone shelf," Brenner said. "How long have you known about it?" "Since 1951, Josef said. "My father told me." "And the geometry, the rotation pull, did you know that would work before you tried it?" Josef thought about it. "I knew the angle was right," he said. "Once the angle is right, the weight does most of the work. That is how it works on a slope." He looked at the switchback. "My father used the shelf for an ox cart that tipped in 1938. The geometry is the same." Brenner was quiet. "The crane operator told me the approach geometry was impossible," he said. "For his machine it was," Josef said. "He was right. But not for yours." "The Lance fits on the shelf," Josef said. "No modern machine would. The shelf was made for the equipment of 1931. He looked at the Lance. "This is closer to the equipment of 1931 than anything else available this morning." Brenner looked at the road. He looked at where the truck had been lying. He looked at Josef. "I should have come to you first," he said. "Yes," Josef said simply. He climbed back onto the Lance. "The road will want the ice patch sanded before the afternoon cold sets in." "I know," Brenner said. Josef drove back up the road to his farm. Pum pum pum. The supply convoy moved through the cleared switchback at 2:15. The farms above the Bergkamp received their winter supplies on time. The road crew sanded the ice patch and added it to the priority list for the winter maintenance schedule. Karl Brenner filed his incident report that evening. In the technical summary he wrote, "Recovery achieved by local farmer using narrow-track tractor and winch from 1931, era road shelf on uphill side, rotation pull method. Operator had specific knowledge of shelf from family records. This method would not have been discoverable by standard survey." He annotated, "Recommends survey of older road features not in current inventory that may have operational relevance." The engineering office filed the information in a category marked local infrastructure records and did not follow up. Josef Mayr continued farming the upper section of the Alpine for 8 more years. The third switchback never surprised him. He knew what was there. When his son Andreas took over the farm in 1975, Joseph told him about the shelf on a morning in March when they drove down the road together. He said, "On the uphill side, 60 centimeters below the road surface, there is a stone shelf 4 meters long, cut in 1931, limestone solid. If you ever need to write something at this switchback, the shelf gives you the angle." Andreas wrote it in the farm notebook on the kitchen shelf. Third switchback, uphill side, stone shelf, 60 cm below road, 4 m long, 1931, limestone. He has not needed it, but it is in the notebook. The Lanz Bulldog fired on the third turn of the crank every spring until 1979, when a second machine arrived and the Lanz was moved to the barn. When someone once asked Joseph why he still started it every year, he said, "Because it was there when I needed it, because it knew the road." Pum pum pum. Some knowledge is not in any document. It lives in the people who learned it from the people who discovered it, passed forward in the specific way that necessary things get passed, not in formal education, not in published records, but in a word from a father to a son on a mountain road in the morning, pointing at a shelf below the surface that no passing eye would notice, saying, "If you ever need it, it is here." The mountain does not care about modern equipment. It cares about whether you know where the limestone is.